Just imagine your beloved husband serving you divorce papers on your graduation day. How would you feel? He handed her divorce papers in front of everyone. On her graduation day, the day that was supposed to be her happiest day turned out to be her nightmare. The cameras were already rolling. Her mother-in-law had planned this for months. His new woman wore white, like a bride at someone else's funeral. The family clapped. Strangers whispered. She stood there, trembling, holding those papers in front of a crowd that watched her break. But what none of them knew, not her husband, not his mother, not the woman replacing her, was that her phone had been buzzing in her pocket for the last 10 minutes. 10 missed calls. 3 urgent messages. All from the same number. She looked down at the screen, and her hands stopped shaking. Because what she saw changed everything. They thought they'd destroyed her on the most important day of her life. They had no idea they'd just made the biggest mistake of theirs. What happened in the next 8 minutes didn't just humiliate them. It ended them. And it all started the moment her name echoed through those speakers. Before we dive in, let's go back to how it all started. But first, if you believe that women like her, women who've been silenced, dismissed, and discarded, deserve to have their voices heard, then subscribe. Because every time you do, you're telling the world that stories like hers matter. And drop a comment with the time of where you're watching from. Let me see how many countries are standing with her right now. Because if we don't amplify voices like hers, who will? Now let me take you back to where this nightmare began. Leora knew the moment she stepped into the Harland estate that she wasn't walking into a home. She was walking into a courtroom where the verdict had already been decided. She carried her books under one arm and her dreams tucked quietly in her chest, believing that love and effort could win over any family. She was wrong. The first dinner was when she understood. Delira Harland sat at the head of the table like a queen presiding over her kingdom, her eyes sharp and calculating as they swept over Leora's modest dress and the textbooks she'd placed on the side table. Riven squeezed Leora's hand under the table, a gesture that felt like reassurance, but when his mother spoke, his grip loosened. "So Leora," Delira began, her voice sweet as poison, "Riven tells me you're still in school. How much longer will that take?" Leora smiled, trying to ignore the edge in the question. "I graduate next year. I'm studying biotechnology and international business." Delira's smile didn't reach her eyes. "That's quite ambitious. But tell me, who will take care of my son while you're buried in books?" The relatives at the table chuckled softly, and Leora felt her face flush. "I manage both. I wake early, I stay organized. Riven and I support each other." Delira sipped her wine slowly, then set the glass down with a deliberate clink. Support is one thing. Priorities are another. A wife's place is beside her husband, not in a classroom competing with men. Riven said nothing. He cut his steak and chewed slowly, avoiding Leora's eyes. That silence told her everything. Have you ever entered a place where you knew you weren't wanted, but you stayed anyway because you believed you could change their minds? From that night forward, Delira made it her mission to remind Leora that she didn't belong. It started with small cruelties, comments about how Leora dressed, how she spoke, how she spent her time. "Education is fine for girls who have nothing else to offer," Delira would say during family gatherings, loud enough for everyone to hear. "But a woman with too much ambition forgets how to be a woman." Leora tried to respond with grace. She helped in the kitchen even when no one asked. She bought thoughtful gifts for birthdays and holidays. She learned family recipes and attended every event with a smile, hoping that kindness could melt the ice. But Delira didn't want kindness. She wanted submission. And when Leora refused to shrink, Delira's resentment grew into something darker. One evening, Leora came home late from a study group and found Riven waiting in the living room, his face tight with frustration. "Where were you?" he asked, his tone sharper than it had ever been. "I told you this morning, study group for my thesis defense. It's next week." He stood up, pacing. "You're always studying. Always gone. My mother said you missed her call today." Leora frowned. "I didn't see any missed calls." "Maybe because you're too busy trying to prove something to people who don't care about you." The words landed like a slap. Leora stared at him, searching for the man she married. But he looked away. "Riven, what's happening to us?" He didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed his jacket and left, leaving Leora standing alone in a house that felt colder every day. That's when she realized Delira wasn't just planting doubts. She was building a wall between them, brick by brick, and Riven was letting her. The worst part wasn't the cruelty. It was watching the man she loved become a stranger, shaped by his mother's hands like clay. Delira's strategy was surgical. She never attacked Leora directly in front of Riven. She planted seeds and let them grow. "She's so focused on her career, I worry she'll outgrow you," she'd whisper to her son during their private lunches. "A woman like that won't stay. She'll leave you behind." And Riven, desperate for his mother's approval, began to believe it. He stopped asking about Leora's projects, stopped celebrating her small victories. When she excitedly told him about a research breakthrough, he shrugged and said, "That's nice," then turned back to his phone. Leora tried to reach him, tried to pull him back, but it was like holding water in her hands. The more she tried, the faster he slipped away. Do you know what it feels like to be married and completely alone? The relatives followed Delira's lead. At family events, they greeted Leora with tight smiles and quick exits. Conversations stopped when she entered the rooms. Invitations came late or not at all. Riven's sister, who once laughed with Leora over coffee, now barely made eye contact. They treated her like a disease they were all trying to avoid. And through it all, Leora kept going. She woke at 5 every morning, attended her classes, worked on her thesis, came home and cooked dinner, then studied until midnight. She believed that if she just kept proving herself and kept showing them her value, they would eventually see her. But they didn't want to see her. They wanted her gone. One night, after another silent dinner where Riven barely looked at her, Leora sat alone in their bedroom and let herself cry. She cried for the marriage she thought she'd have, for the family she thought would accept her, for the man who promised to stand by her but now stood with them. But even in her tears, something inside her refused to break. She wiped her face, opened her laptop, and continued working on the project that would change everything. A project so confidential, so massive, that not even Riven knew it existed. It was a negotiation she'd been leading for months, a deal that could shift entire industries. And as she typed her latest proposal to the international investors, waiting for her final word, she made herself a promise. If they wanted to see her as nothing, she would let them. Right up until the moment she became everything. What Delira didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Leora had already become the one thing they feared most. Powerful. And she was just getting started. Leora believed that hard work was the language of love, that if she poured herself into building a future, Riven would see her devotion, and the family would respect her sacrifice. She was wrong about that too. Every achievement became evidence against her. Every late night studying turned into an accusation. Every missed family gathering became proof that she cared more about herself than them. The harder she worked, the deeper their hatred grew. It started the morning she had to leave early for a major presentation at school. She'd been awake since 4, rehearsing her pitch to a panel of international investors who were considering her research for a multinational project. She made breakfast for Riven, left it covered on the table with a note, and kissed his forehead before slipping out quietly. By noon, her phone exploded with messages. Delira had called a family brunch, and Leora wasn't there. "Where are you?" Riven's text was cold and clipped. "I told you last week, presentation today. It's important. Everything is important to you, except this family." She stared at the message, her stomach twisting. She wanted to call him, to explain, but the panel was waiting. She silenced her phone and walked into the room where her future was being decided, carrying the weight of a war she never asked to fight. When she came home that evening, exhausted but proud because the panel had approved her proposal, she found Riven and his mother waiting in the living room like a tribunal. Delira stood with her arms crossed, her face twisted in manufactured hurt. "You embarrassed us today," Delira said, her voice dripping with accusation. "The whole family was asking where you were. What was I supposed to tell them? That my son's wife cares more about school than her own family." Leora set her bag down slowly, choosing her words carefully. I told Riven about this presentation weeks ago. This project could change our lives. Delira laughed, sharp and bitter. Change your life, you mean? You're trying to rise above us, aren't you? Trying to make us feel small. That's not true. Then why are you never here? Riven interrupted, his voice louder than she'd ever heard it. Why is it always something else? Another class, another meeting, another excuse. Leora turned to him, her heart breaking in real time. Because I'm building something for us. For our future. Don't you see that? He looked away, jaw clenched. All I see is a wife who's never home. Delira stepped closer, her smile cruel and victorious. A woman who neglects her husband will lose him. That's just the way it is. Have you ever worked so hard for someone, only to have them see it as betrayal? From that day forward, Delira made it her mission to sabotage every step Leora took. When Leora's school sent an urgent email about a scholarship opportunity, Delira intercepted it and deleted it. When a professor called the house to congratulate Leora on her research being published, Delira answered and said Leora was no longer interested. When Leora's tuition payment reminder came in the mail, Delira hid it until it was almost too late, forcing Leora to scramble and pay late fees she couldn't afford. But Leora didn't know about any of it. She only saw the results, missed opportunities, confused professors, mounting stress. And through it all, Delira whispered into Riven's ear like a serpent in a garden. She's changing, Delira would say over coffee while Leora was at school. She thinks she's better than us now. You see the way she talks, the way she carries herself. She's going to leave you, Riven. Mark my words. Riven wanted to believe his mother was wrong, but every time Leora came home late or missed a dinner, Delira's words echoed louder. He started watching Leora with suspicion instead of admiration, scanning her face for signs of arrogance that didn't exist. One evening, Leora came home with news she couldn't contain. She'd been selected to lead pre-contract negotiations for an $800 million biotech project that would bring cutting-edge medical solutions to underserved regions. It was the culmination of years of work, the validation of every sacrifice. She found Riven in the bedroom and sat beside him, her eyes bright with hope. Riven, I have to tell you something. I've been selected for a major project. It's international, it's huge, and if it goes through, it'll change everything for us. He didn't look up from his phone. Another project. This one is different. This is the kind of thing people work their whole lives for. He finally turned to her, but his eyes were empty. And what about me, Leora? Where do I fit in your plans? She reached for his hand, but he pulled away. You're everything to me. This is for us. No, he said, standing up. It's for you. Everything you do is for you. She felt the tears coming but swallowed them down. That's not fair. Fair. He laughed bitterly. You want to talk about fair? You're never here. You make me feel like I'm not enough. Like I'm just in your way. Riven, please. My mother was right about you. The words hit her like a punch. She stood frozen as he walked out of the room, leaving her alone with the weight of a truth she'd been denying for months. Delira had won. She turned the man Leora loved into someone she didn't recognize. What do you do when the person you're fighting for becomes the person fighting against you? Leora locked herself in the bathroom and let the tears fall, silent and heavy. She looked at herself in the mirror, exhausted, heartbroken, but still standing. She thought about quitting, about walking away from school, about making herself smaller just to keep the peace. But then she thought about every woman who ever dimmed her light to make someone else comfortable, and something inside her hardened into resolve. She couldn't stop now, not when she was this close. So she wiped her face, straightened her shoulders, and made a decision. She would keep the project a secret. She would guard it like a flame in a storm. And if they wanted to see her as selfish, as arrogant, as someone who didn't belong, she would let them. Right up until the moment the world saw her for who she really was. Because Leora had learned something crucial in that house of whispers and cruelty. Success wasn't a sin. It was a weapon. And she was about to become armed. Delira's war against Leora didn't explode in fire and fury. It grew slowly, carefully, like poison mixed into honey until you couldn't taste the difference. She wore the mask of a concerned mother, so well that even relatives who might have questioned her believed every word. Her weapon wasn't violence. It was whispers, and she aimed them directly at her son's heart. It started during their private Sunday lunches, a tradition Delira insisted on maintaining with Riven while Leora was at her research lab. She would pour him tea, ask about his week, and then, with perfect timing, plant the seeds. "You look tired, sweetheart," Delira said one afternoon, her voice soft with false concern. "Is everything all right at home?" Riven sighed, rubbing his temples. "Leora's just been busy. Really busy." "Busy," Delira repeated, letting the word hang in the air like an accusation. "Is that what marriage has become? One person is always too busy for the other." "She's working on something important. I should be supportive." Delira reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Of course you should. But support goes both ways, doesn't it? When was the last time she supported you? When was the last time she chose you over her ambitions?" Riven didn't answer, but his silence was exactly what Delira needed. She smiled gently, her eyes glinting with satisfaction. "I just worry, that's all. I've seen this before. Women who get a taste of success and forget where they came from. Forget the people who stood by them." "She's not like that," Riven said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I hope you're right," Delira whispered. "I really do. Do you see how easy it is to break someone when you speak to them every day, slowly reshaping their reality until they can't remember what the truth looked like?" The whispers continued, week after week, lunch after lunch. Delira never said anything Riven could argue against. She only asked questions, expressed concerns, shared observations that felt loving on the surface, but rotted everything underneath. And it worked. Riven started coming home with new eyes. He noticed when Leora stayed up late studying. He counted the dinners she missed. He measured her affection against a standard his mother had built in his mind, and Leora always came up short. Meanwhile, Delira prepared her replacement. Celise was the daughter of a family Delira had been courting for years, wealthy, connected, and perfectly content to be decorative rather than driven. She was beautiful in the way magazines celebrated, with glossy hair, expensive clothes, and a laugh that made men feel important. Delira invited Celise to family gatherings, always making sure Riven noticed her. "She's such a sweet girl," Delira would say, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Family-oriented, respectful, knows her place. That's the kind of woman who builds a home, not a resume." Celise played her role perfectly. She asked Riven about his work, laughed at his jokes, complimented his mother's cooking. She never mentioned her own accomplishments, if she had any. She was everything Delira wanted in a daughter-in-law, which meant she was everything Leora wasn't. At a family dinner 3 months before graduation, Leora arrived late from a crucial meeting with international stakeholders. She walked into the dining room still in her professional clothes, her hair pulled back, exhaustion written on her face, but pride glowing underneath. She'd just secured preliminary approval for the biotech contracts framework. But when she entered, she found Celise sitting in the chair that used to be hers, next to Riven. "Sorry I'm late," Leora said, scanning the table for an empty seat. Delira smiled without warmth. "We started without you. Celise was kind enough to join us on such short notice." Riven didn't look up from his plate. Leora found a chair at the far end of the table, her stomach twisting. She tried to catch Riven's eye, but he was listening to something Celise was saying, nodding along like she was the most fascinating person in the room. Delira watched Leora with barely concealed triumph. "Celise was just telling us about her family's charity work. They donated $2 million to the Children's Hospital last month. Isn't that wonderful?" "That's very generous," Leora said quietly. Celise smiled, sweet as sugar laced with glass. "It's important to give back, don't you think? To remember where you come from and take care of your community." The words were aimed like arrows, and everyone at the table knew it. Leora forced a smile and said nothing, but inside something cracked. She saw it then, the whole picture. This wasn't just about making her feel unwelcome. Delira was building her replacement right in front of her. After dinner, Leora tried to talk to Riven in private. She found him in the study, staring out the window. "Can we talk?" she asked softly. "About what?" His voice was flat, distant. "About us. About what's happening." He turned to face her, and for a moment she thought she saw the man she married. But then his expression hardened. "What's happening is you're never around. What's happening is I don't even recognize my own wife anymore. Riven, I'm working towards something that will benefit both of us." "Stop," he interrupted, his voice rising. "Stop talking about the future like it includes me. You've already moved on, Leora. You just haven't left yet." She felt her chest tighten. "That's not true. I love you." "Do you?" He stepped closer, his eyes searching hers. "Because love isn't just words. It's presence. It's priority. And I haven't been yours in a long time. Your mother is poisoning you against me. Can't you see that?" His face went cold. "Don't talk about my mother. She's manipulating you, Riven. She's been planning this since the day we got married." He turned away, jaw clenched. "Get out." "Riven," I said, "get out." She left the room with tears streaming down her face, her heart splintering into pieces she wasn't sure she could put back together. She didn't know that Riven would cry too later that night, confused and torn between the woman he married and the mother who raised him. But Delira's voice was louder, more constant, more convincing. And loyalty to his mother had been drilled into him since childhood. What do you do when the person you love becomes a stranger, and the stranger is someone they chose to become? The next few weeks moved like a countdown to disaster. Riven started coming home late, smelling of perfume that wasn't Leora's. He stopped asking about her day, stopped touching her, stopped pretending. The relatives whispered louder, their smiles sharper. Even the household staff treated Leora like she was already gone. And through it all, Delira orchestrated everything with the precision of a general planning a final battle. She arranged private dinners between Riven and Celise. She had photographers capture moments that could be used later. She consulted lawyers about divorce proceedings and made sure every piece was in place. Because Delira wasn't just trying to remove Leora from their lives. She wanted to erase her completely. And she had chosen graduation day as the stage for Leora's destruction. The one day Leora had worked toward for years. The day she was supposed to finally feel proud. Delira would make sure it became the worst day of her life instead. But what none of them knew, not Delira, not Riven, not Celise, was that Leora had been preparing too. Not for war, but for freedom. And the weapon she carried was something far more powerful than their hatred. It was her truth. And it was about to detonate. Graduation day arrived with skies so clear they looked unreal, as if the universe itself wanted a perfect stage for what was about to unfold. Leora woke before dawn, her heart racing with a mixture of pride and anxiety she couldn't quite name. She'd worked toward this day for years, sacrificed sleep and sanity, endured isolation and cruelty, all for the moment she would walk across that stage and prove that she was more than they ever believed. She dressed carefully in her black graduation gown, the fabric crisp and new, and tucked the invitation into her pocket like a talisman. She looked at herself in the mirror and whispered, "You made it." But when she walked down the stairs of the house she'd called home for 3 years, she stepped into something that felt like a nightmare dressed as a celebration. The living room was filled with people, Riven's entire family, distant relatives she barely knew, and faces she'd never seen before. They were dressed in expensive clothes, holding champagne glasses, cameras ready. For a brief, foolish moment, Leora thought maybe they'd planned a surprise. Maybe, despite everything, they wanted to celebrate with her. Then she saw Celise. She stood next to Riven near the fireplace, wearing a white dress that looked bridal, her smile sharp and victorious. Riven stood stiff, his face unreadable, while Delira positioned herself at the center of the room like a queen about to deliver a verdict. The chatter stopped when Leora reached the bottom step. Every eye turned toward her, and the silence felt like a blade. "What's going on?" Leora asked, her voice steady despite the dread crawling up her spine. Delira stepped forward, her smile polite and poisonous. "Good morning, Leora. We've been waiting for you." Waiting for what? I have to leave soon. The ceremony starts in an hour. Oh, you'll make it, Delira said sweetly. But first, we have something important to handle. Something that's been a long time coming. Leora's eyes darted to Riven, searching for an explanation. But he looked away. Her chest tightened. Riven, what's happening? Delira answered instead. Today, we correct a mistake. The words landed like stones. Leora felt the floor shift beneath her. What mistake? Delira's smile widened. You. The room erupted in murmurs and stifled laughter. Cameras clicked. Leora's hands trembled as she tried to process what was happening. Delira continued, her voice loud and theatrical, designed for the audience watching. Riven has decided to file for divorce. Today. Right now. And Celise will take your place, both in this family and at your ceremony. Leora's breath caught. She looked at Riven, her eyes pleading. Riven, tell me this isn't real. He finally met her gaze, and what she saw there broke something inside her. There was no love, no regret, only cold resignation. It's real, he said quietly. I want a divorce. Her voice cracked. Today? On my graduation day. You made your choice a long time ago, he said, his tone rehearsed, like he'd practiced this with his mother. You chose your career over me. Over us. I'm just making it official. Celise stepped closer, linking her arm through Riven's, her expression dripping with false sympathy. I'm sorry it had to be this way, Leora. But some women just aren't meant to be wives. The relatives nodded in agreement, their faces filled with judgment and satisfaction. Delira handed Leora a folder. The divorce papers, already prepared, already signed by Riven. All you have to do is sign, Delira said. Then you're free to go chase whatever it is you think is more important than family. Leora stared at the papers, her mind spinning. This was planned. Every detail, every witness, every cruel word. It was all orchestrated. They wanted to destroy her publicly, to humiliate her so completely that she'd never recover. Have you ever had the people you loved most turn into strangers who wanted nothing more than to watch you break? Her hands shook as she held the papers. Part of her wanted to scream, to fight, to demand answers. But another part, the part that had been quietly preparing for survival, told her to stay calm. She looked at Riven, really looked at him, and saw a man so small, so weak, so easily molded by his mother's hand that he couldn't even stand on his own. She saw Celise, beautiful and hollow, a replacement chosen not for love, but for convenience. She saw Delira, whose hatred had consumed her so completely that she'd orchestrated this entire spectacle just to feel powerful. And Leora realized something that changed everything. They didn't deserve her tears. Without a word, she walked to the table, picked up a pen, and signed the papers. The room went silent, shocked by how easily she complied. Delira's smile faltered for just a second, as if she'd expected more resistance, more drama. Leora set the pen down, straightened her shoulders, and looked directly at Delira. You win, she said softly. Congratulations. Then she turned and walked toward the door. Where do you think you're going? Delira called after her. Leora paused, her hand on the doorknob. To my graduation. You wanted me gone. Now I am. Oh, no, Delira said, her voice dripping with cruelty. You're not going alone. We're all coming. As a family. Leora's stomach twisted. What? Delira gestured to the group. We wouldn't miss it. After all, Celise needs to be introduced properly. And what better place than in front of all your friends and professors? They should know the truth about who you really are. The plan became clear. This wasn't just about divorcing her. It was about publicly parading her replacement, about making sure everyone at the ceremony knew she'd been discarded. They wanted to humiliate her in front of the entire academic community she'd worked so hard to impress. Celise clapped her hands together, delighted. This will be fun. I've never been to a college graduation before. Riven said nothing, his jaw tight, his eyes avoiding Leora's. For a moment, she thought she saw guilt flicker across his face, but it disappeared as quickly as it came. The family loaded into luxury cars, with Leora forced to ride separately, alone, trailing behind them like a prisoner being led to execution. She sat in the back seat, staring out the window, her mind racing. Every part of her wanted to run, to disappear, to avoid the public destruction they had planned. But something deeper, something stronger, kept her moving forward. She thought about the $800 million deal waiting for her. She thought about the years of sleepless nights and silent endurance. She thought about every woman who'd ever been told she was too much, too ambitious, too difficult to love. And she made a decision. She wouldn't run. She wouldn't hide. She would walk into that ceremony with her head high, and when the moment came, and she knew it was coming, she would let the truth speak louder than their hatred ever could. When they arrived at the campus, the ceremony was already filled with families and graduates. Leora saw her classmates laughing with their loved ones, taking photos, celebrating. And she walked past them, alone, followed by a parade of people who wanted nothing more than to destroy her. They forced her to sit in the back, while Celise took the seat reserved for family, right next to Riven in the front row. Delira made sure everyone nearby knew what was happening, whispering loud enough to be heard. That's his new partner. Much better suited for our family. People stared. Cameras turned. Whispers spread like wildfire. And Leora sat alone, her hands folded in her lap, her heart pounding, waiting. What happens when the worst moment of your life collides with the best moment you've been building in secret? She didn't know yet, but she was about to find out. While the Harlans sat in that auditorium congratulating themselves on destroying her, Leora carried something sewn into the lining of her graduation gown that none of them knew existed. Documents that represented the single greatest achievement of her entire academic career. The $800 million biotech contract wasn't a dream or an exaggeration. It was real, binding, and minutes away from final confirmation. For 6 months, Leora had been leading negotiations with an international consortium of investors, scientists, and government officials across 4 countries. The project was revolutionary, a medical accessibility initiative that would bring life-saving treatments to underserved regions while generating breakthrough research in disease prevention. It was the kind of work that changed industries, saved lives, and built legacies. And she'd done it all in complete silence. The confidentiality agreement she signed at the beginning was ironclad. She couldn't tell anyone, not her professors, not her friends, and especially not her family. The investors demanded absolute discretion until the public announcement, which was scheduled for today during the ceremony, when she would be called to the stage not just as a graduate, but as the lead architect of something historic. She'd wanted to tell Riven so many times. She'd imagined his face when he found out, the pride in his eyes, the way he'd hold her and say he was sorry for ever doubting her. She'd planned to surprise him after graduation, to finally share the secret she'd been carrying alone for months. But that dream died the moment she signed those divorce papers this morning. Now, the secret wasn't something to share. It was armor. She sat in the back of the auditorium, isolated and invisible, while Celise laughed too loudly in the front row and Delira whispered poison to anyone who would listen. But Leora's mind was somewhere else entirely. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A coded message from Dr. Raymondson, the lead investor and head of the consortium. Status check. 15 minutes to the announcement. Confirm readiness. Her fingers trembled as she typed back. Confirmed. Ready. Another message came through immediately. The world is watching, Leora. You've earned this. She closed her eyes and let those words settle into her chest. The world is watching. They had no idea how true that was about to become. Do you know what it feels like to hold the key to your own resurrection and wait for the exact right moment to turn it? The ceremony began with speeches from the dean and guest speakers, words about perseverance and future potential that felt like they were speaking directly to her. Graduates walked across the stage to collect their degrees. Families cheered, cameras flashed. It was beautiful and painful all at once. Leora watched from her seat, her gown hiding the way her hands gripped the armrests, her face calm, but her heart racing like a drumbeat counting down to detonation. Then her phone vibrated again. This time it was a call. She glanced at the screen and saw Dr. Chen's name. Her breath caught. This was it. She stepped out of her row as quietly as possible and moved to the side corridor where she could answer without being heard. The moment she pressed the phone to her ear, his voice came through, steady and serious. Leora, we're live in 3 minutes. The board has given final approval. We're announcing today, and we want you on video when we do. Her voice was barely a whisper. On video? Now. Yes. We're streaming the announcement globally. This is historic, and you deserve to be at the center of it. Can you make it happen? She looked back toward the auditorium, toward the people who had just torn her life apart, and something inside her shifted. This wasn't just about proving them wrong. This was about claiming the space she'd earned, out loud, in front of everyone. Yes, she said, her voice stronger now. I can make it happen. Good. We'll call you back in 2 minutes. Be ready. The line went dead. Leora stood in the corridor, her chest rising and falling, adrenaline flooding her veins. She'd spent months preparing for this moment professionally, but she hadn't prepared for it to happen like this. On the same day her marriage ended, in front of the people who wanted to see her destroyed. But maybe that was exactly how it was supposed to happen. She walked back into the auditorium, her steps deliberate, her spine straight. She didn't sit down. Instead, she moved closer to the stage, positioning herself where she could be seen when the moment came. A few people glanced at her curiously, but she ignored them. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a text with a link to a private video call. Join now. We're going live. She opened the link, and her screen filled with the faces of Dr. Chen and 4 other board members, all dressed in formal business attire, sitting in a conference room with the consortium's logo behind them. Leora, Dr. Chen said, his voice warm. We're about to go live to the public. Are you ready to be introduced as the lead strategist of the Harlan-Chen Global Health Initiative? She froze. The Harlan-Chen Initiative? He smiled. We named it after you. Your vision built this. The world needs to know who you are. Tears pricked her eyes, but she blinked them back. I'm ready. Good. Stay on the line. In 60 seconds, we announce. She held the phone close, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. Around her, the ceremony continued, oblivious to the earthquake about to hit. Then, without warning, the giant screen at the front of the auditorium flickered. The dean paused mid-sentence, confused, as the screen switched from the university's logo to a live feed of the consortium's press conference. The entire auditorium went silent. Dr. Chen's voice boomed through the speakers, calm and authoritative. Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Raymond Chen, and on behalf of the Harlan-Chen Global Health Initiative, I'm honored to announce the completion of negotiations for an $800 million international biotech partnership. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Leora felt every eye in the room turn toward the screen. Dr. Chen continued. This project will revolutionize medical accessibility across multiple continents, and it was made possible by the brilliant leadership of one individual, a young woman whose strategic vision, research excellence, and tireless dedication brought together governments, scientists, and investors from around the world. The camera shifted, and suddenly Leora's face appeared on the screen. Professional photo. Her name in bold letters. Leora Harlan, lead strategist. The auditorium erupted in whispers. Students turned in their seats, scanning the crowd, trying to find her. Professors leaned forward, stunned. And in the front row, Riven's face was drained of color. Sally's smile vanished. Delira gripped the armrest, so hard her knuckles turned white. Dr. Chen's voice continued. Leora Harlan is joining us live right now from her graduation ceremony. Leora, congratulations. The world is proud of you. The camera switched to a live feed, and suddenly Leora's face appeared on the massive screen in real time, standing in the side aisle of the auditorium, phone in hand, looking directly into the camera. The entire room gasped. Every head turned toward her. She stood there, alone, small in the vastness of the space, but her image on the screen was 10 feet tall, undeniable, impossible to ignore. Her voice came through the speakers, steady and clear. Thank you, Dr. Chen. It's an honor to be part of something that will change lives. The applause started slowly, then built into a roar. Students stood. The professors stood. Strangers stood and clapped, not because they knew her, but because they recognized greatness when they saw it. And in the front row, Riven sat frozen, his face pale, his hand shaking. Celise shrank in her seat, suddenly irrelevant. Delira stared at the screen like she was watching a ghost rise from the grave she dug. What do you do when the person you tried to bury becomes the most powerful person in the room? Leora ended the call, slipped her phone into her pocket, and walked toward the stage. The dean, still stunned, extended his hand and invited her up. She climbed the steps slowly, deliberately, every eye in the auditorium locked on her. And when she reached the podium, she looked out at the sea of faces and saw the exact moment the Harlans realized they'd made the worst mistake of their lives. The week before graduation had felt like walking through fog, thick, suffocating, and impossible to navigate. Leora noticed the shift in everything around her, the way silence followed her like a shadow that grew darker each day. Riven stopped answering her calls completely, and when she tried to reach him at work, his assistant said he was unavailable. His texts, when they came at all, were 1 or 2 words, cold and distant as winter stone. She told herself it was stress, that maybe he was dealing with work pressure, that things would get better after graduation when they could finally talk. But deep down, she knew better. The air in their home had turned toxic, and she was suffocating in it. Then came the invitation that felt like a trap disguised as an olive branch. Vivian, Delira's formal name, the one she insisted relatives use in public, called Leora personally, her voice warm and inviting in a way that immediately set off alarms. Leora, darling, I know things have been tense lately. I want to fix that. Come to the estate Thursday evening. We're having a small family dinner to celebrate your graduation early. Just us. No drama. Let's make peace before your big day. Leora hesitated, every instinct screaming that this was wrong. But a small, desperate part of her hoped that maybe, just maybe, Vivian was sincere. Maybe she'd finally seen Leora's worth. Maybe this was the reconciliation she'd been praying for. Okay, Leora said quietly. What time? 7 sharp. Dress nicely. It's a special occasion. The line went dead before Leora could ask anything else. Thursday evening arrived with skies bruised purple and orange, beautiful in a way that felt ominous. Leora dressed carefully in a simple navy dress, nothing too formal but respectful enough for a family dinner. She brought flowers, white lilies, Vivian's favorite, and rehearsed what she might say if given the chance to speak openly. She wanted to build a bridge, to show them she wasn't a threat, that she only wanted to belong. When she arrived at the estate, the driveway was lined with cars she didn't recognize. Her stomach twisted. This wasn't a small family dinner. The front door opened before she could knock, and a staff member ushered her inside without a word. The chandelier in the main hall blazed with light, and she could hear voices coming from the dining room. Too many voices for an intimate gathering. She walked toward the sound, her heels clicking on marble floors, and stepped into a room filled with at least 30 people. Extended family, distant relatives, even some of Vivian's high society friends sat around the long table, all dressed in formal attire, all turning to look at her with expressions that ranged from pity to amusement. Vivian stood at the head of the table like a queen holding court, her smile sharp as a knife. Leora, you're here. How lovely. Please sit. There was one empty chair at the very end of the table, isolated from everyone else. Leora felt her chest tighten, but forced herself to move forward. She set the flowers on a side table, no one acknowledging them, and took her seat. Riven sat near his mother, his eyes fixed on his plate, refusing to look at her. The dinner began with polite conversation, wine flowing freely, laughter that felt rehearsed. Leora tried to participate, but every time she spoke, the conversation shifted away from her as if she hadn't said anything at all. She was invisible, a ghost at her own supposed celebration. Then, halfway through the main course, Vivian stood and tapped her wine glass with a knife. The room fell silent. I want to thank everyone for coming tonight, Vivian began. her voice carrying the practiced authority of someone used to commanding attention. We're here to address something important before Leora's graduation. Something that affects this entire family. Leora's pulse quickened. This wasn't a celebration. This was an ambush. Vivian turned toward her, and the warmth drained from her face, replaced by something cold and calculated. Leora, you've been part of this family for 3 years now. And in those 3 years, you've made your priorities very clear. Your education, your career, your ambitions. All of it has come before your duties as a wife and a member of this family. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Leora's throat went dry. I've tried to be patient, Vivian continued, pacing slowly as if delivering a closing argument. I've tried to guide you, to help you understand what it means to be a Harland. But you've resisted at every turn. And now, with your graduation approaching, I'm concerned. Concerned that this degree will only make things worse. Worse. Leora's voice was barely above a whisper. Vivian's eyes locked onto hers. You're going to leave him, aren't you? Once you have that degree, once you think you're too good for us, you'll walk away. Admit it. That's not true, Leora said, her voice shaking. I've never wanted to leave. I love Riven. Love. Vivian laughed, bitter and mocking. You love your textbooks more than my son. You love your professors more than this family. Don't insult us by pretending otherwise. The room watched in silence, a gladiator arena where Leora was the entertainment. She looked at Riven, pleading with her eyes for him to say something, to defend her, to remember the vows they made. But he sat there, frozen, his jaw tight, saying nothing. Vivian leaned forward, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper loud enough for everyone to hear. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to decline your invitation to walk at graduation. You're going to call the university tomorrow and tell them you can't attend the ceremony. You're going to stay home where you belong, and you're going to prove to this family that you understand your place. The room was so silent Leora could hear her own heartbeat. She stared at Vivian, disbelief and anger warring inside her chest. You want me to skip my own graduation? I want you to choose your family, Vivian said sweetly. Unless, of course, we don't matter to you at all. It was a test. A public humiliation designed to strip away the last piece of dignity Leora had left. If she refused, she'd be labeled selfish and ungrateful in front of everyone. If she agreed, she'd lose the one thing she'd worked years to achieve. Have you ever been forced to choose between your dreams and the people you love, knowing that no matter what you choose, you lose? Leora stood slowly, her legs trembling but her voice steady. No. The word cut through the room like lightning. Vivian's smile faltered. Excuse me. I said no, Leora repeated, louder this time. I'm not skipping my graduation. I've earned that degree. I've sacrificed everything for it. And I'm walking across that stage whether you approve or not. The room erupted in whispers. Vivian's face twisted with rage, the mask finally slipping. You selfish ungrateful. I'm done, Leora interrupted, her voice breaking but her resolve unshaken. I'm done trying to be small enough for you to accept. I'm done apologizing for wanting more. And I'm done pretending this family ever wanted me here. She turned to Riven, tears streaming down her face. I loved you. I would have given you everything. But you let her destroy us. You stood by and watched. Riven's eyes finally met hers, and for a fleeting second, she saw regret. But it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. Leora walked out of that dining room, her heels echoing in the silence, leaving the flowers she'd brought wilting on the table. She didn't know that as she left, Vivian turned to Riven with a smile and whispered, Call her. Tell her it's done. She didn't know that the plan was already in motion, that the humiliation waiting for her on graduation day had been carefully orchestrated down to the last detail. She didn't know that Vivian had already contacted Celise, arranged the timing, rehearsed every word. What Leora did know, as she drove home alone through the dark, was that she had just declared war, and she was ready to fight. But Vivian had already fired the first shot. And it was aimed directly at Leora's heart. Graduation morning arrived with skies so clear they looked painted, the kind of perfect weather that feels like destiny choosing sides. Leora woke before her alarm, her body buzzing with nervous energy that had nothing to do with the ceremony itself. Today was the day everything converged, years of sacrifice, months of secret negotiations, and the final confirmation call from Dr. Chen's investment team that would seal the $800 million deal. She'd been up until 3 in the morning, reviewing documents, answering last-minute questions from the legal team, coordinating time zones across 4 countries. The investors wanted everything finalized before the public announcement, and they'd chosen today specifically because of the symbolic weight. A graduation, a new beginning, a story the media would love. Leora dressed slowly, her hands steadier than they'd been in weeks. She chose a simple white blouse under her graduation gown, professional but understated. She pulled her hair back, applied minimal makeup, and looked at herself in the mirror with something that felt dangerously close to pride. "You did it," she whispered to her reflection. "No matter what happens today, you did it." She checked her phone. Still no message from Riven. Not a text, not a call, not even a generic good luck. The silence hurt more than any argument could have, but she'd grown used to carrying pain quietly. She pushed the thought away and focused on what she could control. Her phone buzzed with an email from Dr. Chen. Final confirmation call scheduled for 10:30 a.m., 30 minutes before the ceremony begins. Stay available. This is historic, Leora. The world is waiting. She read the message 3 times, letting the weight of it settle. The world is waiting, not just for the deal, but for her. She grabbed her folder of documents, backup copies of everything she'd need if the call required last-minute signatures or clarifications, and headed downstairs. The house was empty. Riven had left early without saying goodbye, and the silence felt heavier than usual, like the air before a storm. She made herself coffee, but couldn't drink it. Her stomach was too tight, her mind racing through 1,000 details. She checked the time, 8:15. She needed to leave by 9 to get to campus early, find parking, and prepare. But something felt wrong. The kind of wrong that lives in your bones. The instinct that screams even when logic says everything is fine. She tried calling Riven one more time. It rang once, then went straight to voicemail, as if he'd rejected the call deliberately. Her chest ached, but she refused to let it break her focus. Not today. She grabbed her keys, her folder, and walked out the door, telling herself that after today, everything would change. She just didn't know how much. The campus was already buzzing with life when she arrived. Families gathered in clusters, taking photos, laughing, celebrating. Graduates in black gowns moved like a river of accomplishment, faces bright with relief and joy. Leora watched them with a bittersweet ache. This should have been her too, surrounded by people who loved her, sharing this moment with someone who cared. Instead, she walked alone through the crowd, clutching her folder like a shield, searching for a quiet place to take the confirmation call when it came. She found a bench near the auditorium entrance and sat down, checking her phone every few seconds. 9:45, 10 o'clock, 10:15. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Then, at exactly 10:28, her phone buzzed with a text from Riven. "Come to the side entrance. East doors. I need to talk before the ceremony. Important." Her breath caught. Hope flared in her chest, foolish and desperate. Maybe he'd come to apologize. Maybe he'd realized what he was losing. Maybe this was the moment everything turned around. She stood quickly, smoothing her gown, and walked toward the east entrance, her pulse racing for reasons she couldn't name. The doors were tucked away from the main flow of traffic, partially hidden by tall hedges. She pushed through and stepped into a small courtyard, and froze. Riven stood there, but he wasn't alone. Vivian stood beside him, dressed in an elegant burgundy suit, her expression calm and victorious. And next to them, wearing a cream-colored dress that looked deliberately bridal, was Celise. Her glossy hair fell in perfect waves, her makeup flawless, her smile sharp as broken glass. Behind them, partially hidden in the shadows, were a dozen relatives with cameras already raised, lenses pointed directly at Leora like weapons. "What's going on?" Leora's voice was steady, but her hands trembled. Vivian stepped forward, her smile polite and poisonous. "Good morning, Leora. Thank you for coming. We wanted to speak with you privately before the ceremony begins." "Speak about what?" Riven finally looked at her, and the coldness in his eyes made her stomach drop. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded document. "I'm divorcing you." The words landed like stones. Leora blinked, her brain struggling to process what she'd just heard. "What?" "I'm filing for divorce. Today. Right now." He held out the papers, his hand steady, his face empty of emotion. This marriage was a mistake. "It's over." Leora's vision blurred. "You're doing this now? Here." "It's the right time," Vivian said smoothly. "Clean break. Fresh start. For everyone involved." Celise stepped forward, linking her arm through Riven's with rehearsed ease. "I'm so sorry this is hard for you, Leora. But sometimes people just aren't meant to be together. Riven deserves someone who understands family values. Someone who puts him first." Her voice was sweet, dripping with false sympathy that made Leora's skin crawl. The relatives moved closer, cameras clicking, capturing every second of her humiliation. This wasn't a private conversation. This was a performance, staged and scripted, designed to destroy her in front of an audience. Have you ever stood in front of people who hated you so much they turned your pain into entertainment? Leora's hands shook as she stared at the divorce papers. "Why today? Why here?" "Because you need to understand something," Vivian said, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "You were never good enough for this family. You were never going to be. And walking across that stage today won't change that. You'll still be the girl who lost everything." Riven thrust the papers toward her. "Just sign it. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Leora looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a man she didn't recognize. The boy who'd once held her hand and promised forever had been replaced by a hollow shell, a puppet controlled by his mother's strings. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, to ask how he could throw away 3 years like they meant nothing. But before she could speak, her phone buzzed in her pocket. Once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession. Her breath hitched. She knew what that pattern meant. Dr. Chun was calling. The confirmation call. The deal. The future she'd been building in secret while they tore her apart. Her hand moved to her pocket instinctively, and Vivian's eyes narrowed. "Ignore it," Vivian commanded. "This conversation isn't finished." But Leora's mind was racing. The call would last maybe 5 minutes. If she missed it, if she let this moment consume her, she'd lose everything she'd worked for. The deal required her live confirmation to proceed. Without it, the entire agreement could collapse. She looked at Riven, then at Vivian, then at Celise standing there like a replacement pulled off a shelf, cheaper and more convenient. And something inside Leora snapped. Not into pieces. Into clarity. "No," she said quietly. Vivian's smile faltered. "Excuse me." "I said no." Leora's voice grew stronger. "I'm not signing anything right now. And I'm not doing this here." "You don't have a choice," Riven said, his voice rising. "I've already filed. The lawyers are waiting. Then they can wait longer." She turned and started walking back toward the auditorium entrance. "Where do you think you're going?" Vivian's voice cracked like a whip. Leora paused, looking back over her shoulder. "To my graduation. The one I earned. The one you'll never take from me." She didn't wait for a response. She walked away, her phone still buzzing in her pocket, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might explode. Behind her, she heard Vivian's sharp voice issuing orders. "Follow her. Make sure everyone sees. I want this documented." The relatives trailed after her like vultures, cameras raised, whispering among themselves. Celise clung to Riven's arm, and together they followed Leora back toward the ceremony, determined to finish what they'd started. But what none of them knew, what they couldn't have possibly known, was that Leora wasn't running from them. She was running toward something far bigger. And in less than 10 minutes, the entire world would know her name. Leora walked back toward the ceremony with her spine straight and her vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall, aware that behind her came a parade of people who wanted nothing more than to watch her break. The courtyard that separated the east entrance from the main auditorium felt like the longest walk of her life, each step heavy with the weight of humiliation designed to crush her spirit in front of hundreds of witnesses. Families gathering for the ceremony turned to stare as the spectacle approached, Leora in front, alone in her graduation gown, followed by Riven and Celise walking arm in arm like newlyweds, with Vivian orchestrating from behind and relatives filming everything like it was a reality show finale. Whispers spread like wildfire. Cameras that should have been capturing joyful moments turned toward the drama unfolding in real time. Students stopped mid-conversation, their faces confused and curious. Professors exchanged concerned glances. The air itself seemed to thicken with the electricity of the scandal. Vivian's voice carried across the courtyard, loud enough to be heard by anyone within earshot. It's such a shame when ambition destroys a marriage. But at least Riven is free now to be with someone who truly values family. Celise giggled, a sound designed to pierce, and leaned closer to Riven. I'm just so grateful he finally saw the truth. Some women are just meant to be alone. Leora's hands clenched into fists at her sides, nails digging into her palms. But she kept walking. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her fall apart. Not here. Not now. When she reached the entrance to the main auditorium, an usher stepped forward with a clipboard. Name, please. Leora Harland. The usher scanned the list, then smiled warmly. Congratulations. You're actually seated in a special section, front row, stage left, reserved for honors graduates and keynote participants. Leora's heart skipped. She'd known about the honors designation, but hadn't realized it came with special seating. Behind her, she heard Vivian's sharp intake of breath. There must be a mistake, Vivian said, stepping forward. We're family. We should be seated together. The usher checked her clipboard again. I'm sorry, ma'am, but family seating is in the general section. The front row is reserved exclusively for graduates receiving special recognition. Vivian's face flushed with anger, but before she could argue, another usher directed her, Riven, Celise, and the trailing relatives toward the middle section, far from the stage. For the first time that morning, Leora felt a small flicker of satisfaction. They'd come to humiliate her, but the university had inadvertently separated them, placing her exactly where she belonged, at the front, while they watched from a distance. She found her seat in the front row, surrounded by other honors graduates who smiled and congratulated each other, completely unaware of the war being waged just rows behind them. She sat down carefully, smoothing her gown, trying to steady her breathing. Her phone buzzed again, Dr. Chun. She'd missed the first call while walking through the courtyard. Her heart hammered as she quickly texted back. In ceremony. Can you call in 5 minutes? The response came immediately. Absolutely. This is your day, Leora. We'll make it work. She exhaled slowly, gripping her phone like a lifeline. Behind her, she could feel their eyes, Vivian's burning with rage, Riven's hollow and confused, Celise smug and victorious. The relatives had their cameras trained on her, waiting for her to crumble, to stand up and run, to give them the dramatic breakdown they'd orchestrated this entire spectacle to achieve. But Leora sat perfectly still, her chin raised, her shoulders back, refusing to give them anything. Do you know what it takes to hold yourself together when every part of you is screaming to fall apart? The ceremony began with the university's anthem, and everyone rose. Leora stood with them, mouthing the words she'd sung dozens of times as a student, but her mind was somewhere else entirely. She was thinking about the call that was coming, about the deal that would rewrite her entire existence, about the moment, fast approaching, when everything would change. The dean took the podium and began his opening remarks, talking about perseverance, excellence, and the bright futures awaiting the graduates. His words felt prophetic, like he was speaking directly to her, without knowing it. Then he said something that made Leora's breath catch. Before we begin distributing degrees, we have a very special announcement. One of our graduates has achieved something truly extraordinary, and we've been given permission to share this news with you today. Leora's pulse quickened. She hadn't known the university was aware of the deal. She glanced at her phone. One new message from Dr. Chun. We coordinated with your dean. He knows. Trust the process. Her hands trembled as she set the phone down. This was happening faster than she'd anticipated. The dean continued, his voice filled with pride. This graduate led negotiations for an international partnership that will change lives across multiple continents. The project represents not only academic excellence, but real-world impact of the highest order. And in just a few moments, we'll be hearing directly from the lead investor via live video conference. The auditorium erupted in murmurs and applause. Graduates leaned forward, curious and excited. Behind Leora, she heard Vivian's sharp whisper. Who could they possibly be talking about? Salih's voice dripping with arrogance. Probably some rich kid whose parents bought their way into something impressive. Riven said nothing, but Leora could feel his confusion radiating through the rows of seats between them. The giant screen at the front of the auditorium flickered to life, and Dr. Raymond Chen's face appeared, larger than life, professional and commanding. He sat in a sleek conference room with the consortium's logo, a globe intertwined with a medical symbol, displayed prominently behind him. Good morning. Dr. Chen's voice boomed through the speakers. I'm Dr. Raymond Chen, and I have the distinct honor of announcing the finalization of the Harlan-Chen Global Health Initiative, an $800 million biotech partnership that will revolutionize medical accessibility in underserved regions worldwide. The auditorium went completely silent. You could hear the air conditioning humming. Dr. Chen continued, his tone warm but authoritative. This project required vision, dedication, and leadership of the highest caliber. It required someone who could navigate complex international negotiations, earn the trust of governments and investors, and never lose sight of the human lives at stake. That someone is here with us today. The camera zoomed in on his face. Her name is Leora Harland. The screen split, and suddenly Leora's professional photo appeared beside Dr. Chun. Her name in bold letters underneath. Leora Harland, lead strategist, Harlan-Chen Global Health Initiative. The auditorium exploded. Gasps. Applause. Students turned in their seats, scanning the crowd, trying to figure out where she was. Professors standing, stunned and proud. Parents leaning forward, pointing at the screen. And in the middle section, Vivian's face was drained of all color. Salih's mouth fell open, her expression shifting from smug to horrified in seconds. Riven stared at the screen like he was seeing a ghost, his hands gripping the armrests so hard his knuckles turned white. The relatives lowered their cameras slowly, confusion replacing cruelty. Dr. Chen's voice cut through the chaos. Leora is joining us live right now. Leora, are you there? Every head in the auditorium turned, searching. Leora stood slowly, her legs shaking, but her voice steady as she held up her phone. I'm here, Dr. Chun. The crowd turned toward her voice, and suddenly 1,000 eyes locked onto her. The student next to her gasped, That's you. Leora nodded, her throat tight with emotion. Dr. Chen's face on the screen broke into a wide smile. Leora Harland, on behalf of the entire consortium, I want to publicly thank you for your extraordinary leadership. This deal is finalized. The contracts are signed. And the world is about to be a better place because of you. The applause started as a wave and built into a roar. Students stood. The faculty stood. Even strangers who didn't know her stood and clapped because they recognized excellence when they saw it. The dean rushed to the microphone, his face beaming. Leora, would you please join me on stage? She walked down the aisle toward the stage, her legs trembling, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. Every step felt like shedding skin, like the woman they tried to humiliate was being left behind, and someone new, someone unstoppable, was emerging. As she climbed the steps to the stage, she passed by the section where the Harlan sat. She didn't look at them directly, but she felt their presence like ice in the room. Vivian sat frozen, her mouth slightly open, her perfect composure shattered. Salih's had shrunk into her seat, suddenly invisible and irrelevant. And Riven Riven stared at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Shock. Regret. Maybe even fear. When Leora reached the podium, the dean shook her hand and stepped aside, giving her the microphone. She looked out at the sea of faces, at the cameras recording, at the live feed streaming to thousands online. And for the first time in 3 years, she felt powerful. What do you say to the people who tried to destroy you when you're standing on top of the world they said you'd never reach? She took a breath and began to speak. Leora stood at the podium with 1,000 eyes fixed on her, the weight of the moment pressing down like gravity itself. But instead of crushing her, it felt like the earth was finally holding her up. The microphone hummed softly as she adjusted it, her hands steadier than they'd been all morning. Behind her, the massive screen still displayed her name and title in bold letters that seemed to glow with their own light. She looked out at the crowd, students who didn't know her story, professors who'd watched her struggle, families celebrating their own victories. And then her gaze drifted, almost against her will, to the middle section where the Harlans sat frozen like statues carved from shock. Vivian's face had lost all its color, her mouth pressed into a thin line, as if she were physically holding back a scream. Celise had her hand over her mouth, eyes wide with something between disbelief and terror. Riven stared straight ahead, not at Leora, but at the screen above her. As if seeing her name, there was the only way he could process what was happening. The relatives, who'd followed them with cameras, now lowered their phones slowly, their entertainment turning into their own humiliation. Leora took a breath and spoke, her voice clear and unwavering. Thank you, Dr. Chun, and thank you to everyone here today. This moment feels surreal, not just because of what this partnership represents, but because of what it took to get here. The crowd leaned in, silent and captive. For the past 6 months, I've been working in secret on something I believed could change lives. I couldn't tell anyone, not my professors, not my friends, not even my family. The confidentiality agreement was strict, and I respected it. But carrying that secret meant carrying the weight of it alone. Every late night, every missed event, every moment I wasn't where people expected me to be. It was because I was building something bigger than myself. Her voice caught slightly, emotion rising, but she pushed through. People will judge you for your choices when they don't know the full story. They'll call you selfish when you're actually sacrificing. They'll say you've changed when you're actually growing. And they'll try to make you small when you're becoming everything you were meant to be. The auditorium was so quiet you could hear hearts breaking. Somewhere in the back, a student whispered, "She's talking about someone specific." Leora's eyes flicked toward the Harlans, just for a second, and everyone who followed her gaze understood. She continued, her voice stronger now. This project, this $800 million initiative, will bring advanced medical treatments to regions that have been forgotten. It will save lives. It will create jobs. It will prove that when you invest in people who others overlook, you don't just change one life. You change the world. The applause started to build, but Leora raised her hand gently, signaling she wasn't finished. But here's what I want every person in this room to understand, especially the young women who are graduating today. Your worth is not determined by who believes in you. It's determined by what you build when nobody's watching. And when they try to tear you down, and they will try, you stand back up and let your work speak louder than their words ever could. The applause erupted like thunder. Students shot to their feet. Professors nodded with tears in their eyes. Even parents who didn't know Leora felt the power of her words settle into their bones. Dr. Chen's voice came through the speakers again, cutting through the noise. Leora, the board has one more surprise. We'd like to make the final contract signing happen right now, live, in front of everyone. Would you be willing to do that? Leora's breath caught. She hadn't expected this. Right now. We're streaming this globally. Let the world see what true leadership looks like. She nodded, her throat tight. I'm ready. The screen shifted, and suddenly a digital contract appeared, complete with official seals and signatures from every board member already in place. A QR code flashed on the screen with instructions for Leora to access the document on her phone. She pulled out her phone with trembling hands, scanned the code, and the contract opened before her eyes. Pages and pages of legal language that represented the culmination of everything she'd worked for. The final signature line was blank, waiting for her. "Before you sign," Dr. Chen said, his voice solemn and proud, "I want to read aloud the official recognition from aboard. Leora Harland is hereby recognized as lead strategist and chief architect of the Harlan-Chen Global Health Initiative. Her vision, dedication, and tireless effort have made the impossible possible. This partnership would not exist without her." The crowd roared again, but Leora barely heard it. Her eyes were locked on the signature line, her finger hovering over the screen. This was it. The moment everything changed. She signed her name in one smooth motion, Leora Harland, and the document flashed green, signaling completion. Confetti exploded on the screen behind her, and Dr. Chen stood, applauding along with the rest of his board. "It's official," he announced. "The Harlan-Chen Global Health Initiative is now active. Congratulations, Leora. You've just made history." The auditorium erupted into chaos. Students screamed with excitement. Cameras flashed like lightning. The dean rushed forward to shake her hand again, his face glowing with pride. And in the middle section, the Harlans sat in stunned silence, their world imploding in real time. Have you ever watched someone you underestimated become everything you feared they would be? Vivian's hands shook as she gripped her purse, her carefully constructed composure shattered beyond repair. She'd spent years building a narrative about Leora, selfish, ungrateful, a woman who didn't know her place. And in less than 10 minutes, that narrative had been exposed as the lie it always was. Celise turned to Riven, her voice barely a whisper. "Did you know about this?" Riven didn't answer. He couldn't. His mind was spinning, replaying every conversation, every argument, every moment he'd chosen to believe his mother over his wife. He thought about the nights Leora stayed up late, and he'd accused her of neglecting him. He thought about the meetings she attended, and he'd called her selfish. He thought about the future she tried to tell him about, and he dismissed her as delusional. And now she stood on that stage, her name projected 10 feet tall, being celebrated by the entire world while he sat in the audience, a man who'd thrown away a diamond because his mother convinced him it was glass. One of the relatives leaned over and whispered to Vivian, "Did you know she was working on something like this?" Vivian's jaw clenched. "Of course not. She kept it from us. On purpose. Or maybe," the relative said carefully, "she kept it from you because you never gave her a reason to share it." Vivian's head snapped toward the woman, but she said nothing, because deep down she knew it was true. On stage, Leora stepped back from the podium as the dean took over to continue the ceremony. But before she could return to her seat, Dr. Chen's voice came through one more time. "Leora, one final thing. The board has approved an additional announcement. As lead strategist, you'll be relocating to Geneva, Switzerland, to oversee the implementation of the initiative. Your position comes with full authority, a global team, and a compensation package of $12 million annually." The auditorium gasped. Leora froze, her mind struggling to process what she'd just heard. $12 million. Annually. Relocation to Geneva. Full authority. Dr. Chen smiled. "We expect you in 30 days. Congratulations, Leora. You've earned every bit of this." The applause was deafening, but Leora barely heard it. She walked back to her seat in a daze, her legs moving on autopilot, her heart pounding so hard she thought she might pass out. When she sat down, the honors graduate next to her grabbed her hand and squeezed it. "You're incredible," the girl whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You just gave all of us hope." Leora squeezed back, unable to speak, afraid that if she opened her mouth, she'd break down completely. Behind her, in the middle section, Vivian stood abruptly. "We're leaving," she hissed. "Now." Riven didn't move. He sat frozen, staring at the back of Leora's head, watching her receive congratulations from strangers while he sat among the wreckage of the family that destroyed her. "Riven." Vivian's voice was sharp. "We're leaving." "No," he said quietly. Vivian's eyes went wide. "Excuse me." "I'm not leaving." His voice was hollow, defeated. "I need to see this. I need to see what I lost." Vivian's face twisted with rage, but she couldn't make a scene. Not here, not now, not when every camera in the room might turn toward them. So she sat back down, rigid and furious, forced to watch the woman she tried to destroy rise higher than she could ever reach. And Leora, sitting in the front row with her future stretching out before her like an open sky, finally let herself feel it. Not triumph, not revenge, just freedom. Pure, unshakable, hard-earned freedom. What does it feel like to become everything they said you'd never be? The applause from Dr. Chen's announcement hadn't fully faded when Leora rose from her seat again, and the entire auditorium sensed that something more was coming. The dean had moved to continue with degree distributions, but Leora stepped forward and gently raised her hand, a gesture so calm yet commanding that he paused mid-sentence. She returned to the podium, and the crowd fell silent again, leaning forward as if pulled by invisible strings. Even those who'd been whispering stopped, their attention locked on the woman who'd just rewritten the meaning of this ceremony. Leora looked out at the sea of faces, her expression no longer uncertain or guarded, but clear and resolute, like someone who'd finally stepped out of shadows into blinding light. "I know the ceremony needs to continue," she began, her voice steady and strong. "But before it does, I need to say one more thing. Not just for myself, but for every person here who's ever been told they weren't enough." The silence deepened. Parents stopped adjusting cameras. Students stopped fidgeting. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. "This morning," Leora continued, her eyes sweeping across the crowd, "I was handed divorce papers. In a courtyard just outside this building, in front of cameras and an audience, I was publicly humiliated by people who believed that today, my graduation day, was the perfect time to destroy me." Gasps rippled through the auditorium. Heads turned toward the middle section where the Harlan sat. Vivian's face went rigid. Riven sank lower in his seat. Celise looked like she wanted to disappear. Leora's voice didn't waver. "They thought that by taking away my marriage, by parading a replacement in front of me, by making me feel small and worthless, they could erase everything I'd built. They believed that a woman's value is measured by who stands beside her, not by what she creates with her own hands." The crowd was absolutely still, every word landing like a hammer. "But here's what they didn't understand," Leora said, her voice rising with quiet power. "You can't destroy someone who's already learned to build herself back up. You can't humiliate someone who knows her worth. And you can't erase someone who's already written herself into history." The applause started to build, but she raised her hand again, and it stopped immediately. She wasn't finished. "So let me be very clear about something." She reached into the pocket of her gown and pulled out the folded divorce papers Riven had given her earlier. The sight of them sent a shockwave through the room. She held them up for everyone to see, the official documents that were supposed to mark her defeat. "These papers were designed to break me, to make me sign away my dignity along with my marriage, to force me to accept that I wasn't good enough." She paused, her eyes locking onto the section where Riven sat frozen. "But I'm not signing them. Not because I want to hold onto something that's already dead. I'm not signing them because I'm filing my own divorce. On my terms. In my time. With my lawyers." The crowd erupted. Students cheered. Women in the audience stood and clapped. Even some of the older professors nodded with fierce approval. Leora held the papers up higher and then, with slow deliberation, tore them in half. The sound of ripping paper echoed through the auditorium like thunder. She tore them again and again, until the pieces fluttered from her hands like confetti, drifting down onto the stage. The applause became a roar. People weren't just clapping. They were celebrating a moment of resistance, of reclamation, of a woman refusing to let anyone else write the ending of her story. Vivian shot to her feet, her face twisted with rage and humiliation. "This is outrageous. You can't." But her voice was drowned out by the noise, swallowed by the crowd's energy. No one cared what she had to say anymore. She'd lost her audience. Leora's voice cut through the chaos, amplified by the microphone. "To everyone watching, both here and online, I want you to understand something. The people who try to tear you down are usually the ones who are terrified of what you're becoming. They see your potential, and it scares them because it reminds them of everything they're not. She looked directly at Vivian now, her gaze unflinching. I was never the problem. I was just the mirror that showed them their own smallness. Vivian's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She stood there, exposed and powerless, while the woman she'd spent years trying to destroy stood on a stage 10 feet above her, victorious and untouchable. Leora turned her attention back to the crowd. I don't need revenge. My success is revenge. I don't need them to apologize. Their silence is the apology. And I don't need anyone to validate my choices anymore, because the results speak for themselves. She gestured toward the screen behind her, where her name and title still glowed. $800 million. $12 million a year. A global team. A chance to change the world. That's what happens when you refuse to shrink. That's what happens when you choose yourself. The applause was deafening, and this time Leora let it wash over her. Let it fill the spaces in her heart that had been hollow for so long. The dean stepped forward, his eyes glistening. Leora Harland, it is my absolute honor to present you with your degree, summa cum laude, with distinction in biotechnology and international business. He handed her the diploma, and she held it like a trophy won in battle. Cameras flashed. The live stream exploded with comments from people around the world who were watching this unfold in real time. And then something unexpected happened. One by one, the other honors graduates in the front row stood and began clapping specifically for her. Then the row behind them stood. Then the row behind that. Within seconds, the entire graduating class was on their feet, and the applause shifted into something rhythmic, almost like a chant. Leora, Leora, Leora. Her name echoed through the auditorium like a battle cry, like a promise, like proof that one woman's courage could ignite something far bigger than herself. Leora stood at the center of it all, tears finally streaming down her face, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of release, of victory, of knowing she'd survived the worst and come out stronger. In the middle section, Riven sat with his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking. The relatives around him whispered furiously, some angry, some ashamed, but none willing to meet anyone's eyes. Celise had already slipped out of her seat and disappeared toward the exit, unable to bear the weight of being seen as the woman who tried to replace a legend. And Vivian stood frozen, her face a mask of shock and devastation, watching her entire plan crumble into nothing. She'd orchestrated this day to be Leora's destruction. Instead, it became her own. Have you ever watched someone's hatred backfire so completely that it destroyed them instead of their target? As the ceremony continued and degrees were distributed, Leora returned to her seat one final time. The girl next to her leaned over and whispered, "You're going to be in history books. You know that, right?" Leora smiled a real smile and whispered back, "Maybe. But right now, I'm just glad I survived to tell the story." When the ceremony ended and families poured out onto the lawn for photos and celebrations, Leora stood alone for a moment, holding her diploma and watching the crowd. She saw classmates embracing their parents, couples kissing, children running with balloons. And for a brief second, she felt the ache of what she'd lost. But then her phone buzzed with a message from Dr. Chun. "Your flight to Geneva is booked for 3 weeks from today. Apartment arranged. Team assembled. The world is waiting for you, Leora. Welcome to your future." She read the message twice, letting the reality sink in. 3 weeks. She had 3 weeks to pack up the life that had tried to kill her and step into the life she'd built in secret. She looked back toward the auditorium one last time and saw Riven standing near the entrance, alone, watching her from a distance. Their eyes met across the crowded lawn, and for a moment, the world seemed to pause. He opened his mouth as if to say something, took one step toward her, then stopped. Because what could he possibly say? "I'm sorry? Am I wrong? I didn't know." None of it would matter. The woman he married was gone, replaced by someone he no longer had the right to know. Leora held his gaze for 3 seconds, long enough to let him see exactly what he'd lost, and then turned and walked away. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. Behind her, Riven stood frozen, watching her disappear into a future that would never include him. And for the first time in his life, he understood the true cost of choosing comfort over courage, approval over truth, his mother's voice over his wife's heart. Vivian found him standing there, her face still pale with shock. Riven, we need to leave. Now. Before the press. She won, Riven said quietly, his voice hollow. What? She won. And we lost everything. Vivian's mouth opened, then closed. For once in her life, she had nothing to say. As the sun set on Leora's graduation day, she sat alone in a quiet corner of the campus library. The same library where she'd spent countless sleepless nights building the future no one believed in. She opened her laptop and began drafting the email that would officially terminate her marriage, but this time on her terms, with her lawyers in her time. The subject line read simply, moving forward. And as she typed, she realized something profound. This wasn't an ending. It was the beginning. The kind of beginning that only comes after you've walked through fire and discovered you're not just fireproof. You're the flame. What happens when the woman they tried to destroy becomes the woman they'll spend the rest of their lives wishing they'd protected? The answer is simple. She becomes free. And freedom, once tasted, can never be taken away. Thanks for watching, and please drop a comment telling us where you are watching from and the best part of the story you enjoyed most.